thank you very much for a lovely introduction. And I'm going to try and avoid the usual lots and lots of climate graphs and kind of doom and gloom and just go through what's actually possible for every single person here who's involved in architectural education or in architectural practice as well. So let's hope it works. So yeah, the reason I'm speaking pretty much is that there's this incredible quote from Naomi Klein, and it just so happens that we're all alive at the last possible moment when changing course can mean saving lives on a truly unimaginable scale. So the gravity of the climate emergency is absolutely huge, goes beyond any challenge we've ever faced as species in history, but it's also this incredible opportunity to radically transform lives at the same time. But the thing is, this is only possible if we embrace systemic, economic, and social change. So really concisely, to continue as we have and to continue with what we call normal is pretty much incompatible with climate and intergenerational justice. What we consider normal is entirely dependent upon sacrificial lives, landscapes, and communities. So it's all about putting justice at the heart and soul of everything we're doing around the climate. So just to introduce myself a little bit, that was an incredible introduction, and I'm still get a little bit overwhelmed and surprised that I've done stuff, and getting it read by people is a little bit embarrassing sometimes. But this is a little bit of a kind of a one page on the things I've done. So at the moment, I practice the part to architectural assistant of architect and do some sustainability coordination, and I co-direct Anthropocene project CIC. And all of this kind of stemmed from when I was in university and I was not seeing this response to climate change, sustainability was not embedded in the core of what we were doing, I went out with. So I didn't really take the traditional route. I did complete university, but I was going out in summers to volunteer on ecological building sites. So on the left-hand side, that's Le Contamino Montjoly, where I helped to build a hempcrete chalet. The bottom middle is an Exeter, so that was Shillingford Organics. That's a straw bale building, and the latest was the Bridge End Buffet in Edinburgh. So I do lots of my learning practically, and I also help coordinate the Architects Climate Action Network's Carbon Literacy Working Group. I do some help with some stuff with RIAS, the Sustainability Working Group there, and I've just loved to do natural building on the side. So that's my little bit of joy and spark of happiness in there as well. So this is part of my why as well. So when I went to go and learn practically, when I had just finished my second year of university, this was my first ever view from a building site. So this is in the French Alps, and this is what construction can be when it's done positively and regeneratively. So I got to learn from people doing carpentry, clay and lime plastering, engineers, architects, craftspeople, you name it, so many different disciplines. And there was no distinction between them. Everyone got to learn from everyone else. And it's just, I've been in similar places since, but it just shows that every single building has the potential to be a learning resource as it's built and as it's constructed. And that can be done in much more regenerative ways than we typically do at the moment. So this is a little bit of a different one. So we're going to do a bit of a chaptered storytelling of things that have been possible. So this is for anyone, there's nothing distinctly special about the things that I've been able to do. It's been fun, but everyone is capable of that. So this is all about the agency every single person has. So it's really about activism and agency and what is possible. And lots of this was very much me getting an idea and running with it, or someone else getting an idea and extending the invitation. So this is all about getting things done and all about doing things. It's fantastic to see you're getting a group started at the university as well. So very much kind of just to introduce as well, we've got this, as I said really succinctly, we're in the Anthropocene. So this is a totally different time than the Holocene. There's kind of the conditions that were perfect for life to emerge on Earth. But this quote stands out for here. So it's, my actions, like yours, this year and next will have an incalculable impact on all life. So everything we are doing right now is incalculably important. So the IPCC report recently stressed the next 4 years are critical. It's not the next 10, it's not 20, it's the next 4. So everything we are doing right now is incredibly important. So the Anthropocene Architecture School, as was said before, is an agile education platform. So it's not got a building. It's not rooted in one place. It can do stuff basically anywhere, usually momentarily occupying space. But what it does is support built environment professionals, students, and educators by creating the spaces to learn about and respond to the climate emergency. Because these spaces are still very rare in architecture and they're very rarely public. And at the same time, it's about learning like our house is on fire, because it literally is on mega to gigafire quite regularly and quite often now. But at the same time, it's calling out inaction and non-response when it's necessary, because we have been warned about this for decades. We have known, and we've only seen a real surge in the last 2 to 3 years, which is which is really, it's an outrage in itself. So that has to be acted upon at the same time. So this is just a little map to show where the Anthropocene Architecture School has done bits and pieces over the last couple of years. So just, this is possible for anyone who has the passion, the energy, and goes for it. This is in no way a boast. This is an invitation for people to outdo what I've done, because that would be incredible. So this has involved doing some lectures for Toronto, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, lots in the UK, and lots in my home country of Scotland as well, which is great fun. But this is the Anthropocene. So why the word Anthropocene? Why name a school of architecture after a geological epoch? So the thing about the Anthropocene is it's about moving into a new space. It's about going beyond what's been precedented on Earth in the past 800,000 years. So this quote from Underland by Robert McFarlane really sums it up. So at the moment, we are presently living through the Anthropocene. So this is an epoch of immense and often frightening change at planetary scales. This is absolutely huge. But crisis is not something that's a kind of deferred future apocalypse. It's something that's ongoing occurrence, and it's experienced most by the most vulnerable. So that's just the setting of our scenes for where we are. So I chose the word Anthropocene as an invitation for conversations, and to not use the words eco, green, climate, sustainable, any of the usual words as well. So, and at the same time, we've had evidence of climate change every single day since the start of 2012. So that means children born in 2012 have never lived a day of their lives without experiencing, in some level, climate change changing how that life is. And it's no longer a kind of an anomaly and every once in a while. It's a perpetual background noise, and it's not going away. It's not something that's going to stop when we get to net zero. This is going to continue. So the report that came out in 2018 was the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees. So this was the one that really jolted so much into action. And it said that we had to hit net zero by 2050. And we had, but that's where your 12 years to save the world line came from. We had to half emissions in 12 years. And that's huge in itself, but we're not just halving them, we're halving them and then we're hitting zero. But that has been said by many in the climate justice movement to be entirely inadequate. It's taking far too long and it's not urgent enough. So just to kind of explain that a little bit. So if we were to go for achieving the sustainable development goals and lowering emissions, we have a chance to limit global warming. We do have a chance, and that's doable. But to continue as we are is to accept kind of 3 to 4 degrees of warming. And with what we're seeing at 1.2, that's unthinkable. So that cannot happen if we have anything to do with it as well. But just to kind of give a bit of a picture, what does our idea of normal actually look like? So Kate Raworth's Donut Economics is a really succinct way of showing this on one really useful graph. So this combines the sustainable development goals. They are your social foundation. They're your inner green ring. Anything dropping below that means people's needs are not being met. The outer green ring is the planetary boundaries, which are parts of the Earth's climate and its systems that, if tripped, will have massive effects and ripple effects as well. So at the present, what our normal looked like, even before COVID-19, was surpassing 4 out of 9 planetary boundaries at the same time as not meeting all people on Earth's needs equally and justly. So that's just a really quick painting of the picture, and one of the last graphs I'm going to show you as well. But people's responses to climate change have varied extensively. So before that report even came out, Greta Thunberg was doing her solo skill strike for climate outside the Swedish Parliament. And then on the same day and the same time, there was Extinction Rebellion burst into life by dropping banners off of the bridges in London, at the same time as the Sunrise Movement occupied the Speaker of the House's office, demanding a Green New Deal and green jobs for all as well. So this is all happening at the same time. And then a year after this as well, we had the kind of founding and the launching of the Architects Climate Action Network, who have grown exponentially since as well. So people's movements all of this has been happening at the same time. There's lots of parallels, but there's still a huge lack of government level action nationally and internationally as well. And there was an update to this. So 2018's report was the one that shocked people. 2021 is the one that said, it's not a 12 years thing, it's a 4 years, and you must do absolutely everything possible as fast as possible. So this is kind of just a quick picture of where we are without having to use too many graphs and keeping it as light-hearted as possible towards the end. But even climate scientists are saying very, very, very bluntly that this 2050 goal in net zero is procrastination. We cannot wait until 2050. Things need to happen now. So this is climate scientist Peter Kalmus, who says that 2035 should be the absolute latest. And groups like Extinction Rebellion say 2025 should be the latest as well. So this is kind of where we are. Lots of net zero things depend upon technologies that don't actually exist at massive scale yet. The largest carbon capture and storage that's been built can take the equivalent to 800 cars off the road, but that's entirely obliterated by the number of cars we continually build. So it's a little bit useless. But just to paint the picture of where the built environment sits in that context, 39% of all the carbon emissions on Earth come from the construction of and operation of our buildings. So anyone with any agency in the built environment has a massive potential to do positive things. So if it's not blue on this graph, you can affect it in your education, you can affect it through work, you can affect it through advocacy and activism. So that's just to put where we are. We have this huge space for change in the built environment that at the moment is currently not being realized. So when I wanted to start this all hit me at once in late 2018, it was kind of my complete disbelief that architecture wasn't responding. But then the architecture fringe chose its theme to be in real life. So looking at things affecting all of us, the day-to-day, just our normalcy. So a couple of Photoshop layers later and checking they didn't mind, the poster for the Anthropocene Architecture School was simply pointing out that in real life there's a climate crisis. And as provocation was in the face of climate breakdown, architectural education has become obsolete and is no longer preparing practitioners for future practice. So this is a little bit of what that looked like. So this was pre-COVID. This was, I went for a theatrical to make it very memorable. So this is the oldest Victorian music hall in the world. And this is in Glasgow, oldest surviving Victorian music hall in the world. And this is where the Anthropocene Architecture School was launched. So instead of the usual, getting someone to speak, I did the antithesis of that. And with a polylogue, we had the entire attendance speak on what the Anthropocene meant upon education. So that was the kind of launching of the school then. And from there, I started using just kind of social media to put things out and let people know what was happening, to share resources, to share happenings, goings on. And then unintentionally got put together a library, which now has about 100 odd different resources in it. And that was just part of the kind of the same strategy of putting out as much as possible consecutively and just making lots of noise. And it turns out that by tagging authors, lots of them like to talk to you as well. So that's a very helpful hint. But this is what the work of the Anthropocene Architecture School would look like before COVID. So it was momentarily occupying spaces to create the space to learn about the climate emergency. So this began in the Britannia Panopticon. And then the second picture was when the school went to the Edinburgh Fringe and we had a hackathon there to look at different aspects of the city of Edinburgh. And then lecturing and practices. So I suddenly found myself being asked to teach architectural practices in firms who wanted to get this into their kind of practice and how do they teach their staff and engage them on this. And this then led to speaking at the RIS National Convention, where I was asked just to set the tone of a climate emergency. So I did very, very bluntly. And then just kind of the second and third will get covered in a little bit as well. So the kind of second chapter of this is looking at the crisis studio tour, because you can do all the provocation you want, but until teaching is taking place, things are not going to change. So the quote that kind of sums up all of this is a fantastic one that I'm probably going to be using for years. So long as we educate young people into modern ways of thinking, we'll continue to perpetuate the very civilization that's destroying the planet. So our modern ways of thinking are usually dependent upon those sacrifice zones. And we really need to start moving above, beyond, and regenerating the world that we inhabit. So it's about moving beyond that. So I took that quite literally, just kind of went for it. So what launched the school as well was doing this little bit of research. So to quantify how well students of architecture understood what sustainability in the built environment really was. So picking just some concepts at the time that I would probably tweak in retrospect, but just to see what kind of numbers came out. And when the average came back at 59.4%, there was quite a panic in lots of places. And this was just showing that the extent of the knowledge gap was huge. And this is when people are asked to self-assess. This is not when it's done on the merit of what they've been doing as well. So this is people giving the optimistic figure of how well we know this. So this led to the Crisis Studio project. So this was taking a multidisciplinary tutor team and just create a holding space for students to bring their ongoing work to use as an armature to teach sustainable design skills. So we had architects, sustainability consultants, passive house designers, natural builders, activists, retrofit coordinators, you name it. We had more people offering to help when I put the call out in Scotland than we could actually bring in. It was absolutely fantastic. And there's so much untapped potential in people in practice who want to share these skills and want to find a way. So this ended up involving over 30 different organizations, practices, and individuals just to teach as urgently and rapidly as possible. So some of the feedback was students had never been told any of this stuff before in university. They were quite surprised. And others got incredibly excited because they were actually learning about responding to climate change. And some of them learned more in 15 minutes than they had in 2.5 years, which says quite a lot for the state of architectural education as it was and still kind of is. And part of this was an ongoing research project. So this was getting assessment from the tutors and from the students to really just to paint the picture of where we were in terms of responding to the climate emergency. So as much as like students had great intentions, they had not been prepared with the technical skills. Design briefs were not actually taking reality into account. And students were fully aware they are not being prepared for the climate emergency. And one quote from one tutor in particular was, experiencing the students' lack of understanding of basic ecological design principles was horrifying. So these are from people who are doing this day to day. So this was like ongoing research as part of teaching as an intentional perpetual feedback loop. So then it doesn't always have to be teaching or practice as we know it. So the third kind of movement of this is the lockdown festival of architecture. So we were actually told by the IPCC report in 2018 that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees is entirely possible. It's possible within the laws of chemistry and physics, but doing so requires unprecedented changes. So the lockdown festival of architecture was very playful, and it was looking at how do we look at the kind of the pause and the shutdown of most of the world during the COVID-19 pandemic. And how do we keep the positive aspects of that, and how do we design for the future? So this was a really playful festival of activism. So this was as few kind of talking at people, as much kind of participation as possible. So we had Designing Rebellion 1 and 2. So that was, we had Nick from Studio Bark came and explains the boxes that they designed and how this was used during some incredible protests in London. We actually entered the Home of 2030, but we didn't win. We didn't even get longlisted. It turns out entering a sinking house and an exhibition about government inaction on climate change does not get you many kind of wins. And we had a view for an activist sketchbook. So we looked for lots of the different techniques that we'd deployed in different places and sort of went for a little bit of the story of the Anthropocene architecture school as an example. And then we had an architectural assembly. So we had a kind of an online people's assembly involving Culture Declares, Rob Hopkins, who founded the transition movement. We had Extinction Rebellion Bristol, who zoomed in from on top of a town hall they were on at that point. We had inputs from Extinction Rebellion Scotland. And this was all initiated by Peter Brooks, who had the idea. So one person has the idea, that's the spark, and it's just making those connections in the networks. But this just was our way of just doing something and envisioning a more positive future, rather than just taking the kind of the quite stuffy conversations in architecture and looking at the kind of beyond the doomism in some parts of the climate movement as well. But then the work has also moved, that I do works in climate literacy. So climate literacy is what I found the easiest way to talk to architects and to fill in the gaps around what we haven't been taught and what our education has not prepared us with. So we were told by the IPCC report in 2018 that if we want to be on any pathway consistent being below 1.5 degrees, building emissions have to be reduced by 80 to 90% by 2050. New construction should have been fossil-free and near zero energy by last year, and there should be a 5% increase on retrofit. So that was the baseline. We were set the baseline, and it was about how do we get there? How do we fill in the gaps and prepare people to deliver what we've been told by the best collection of climate scientists in the world is necessary? So with climate literacy, it's about understanding that sustainability is about more than just tick box exercises, carbon and energy. It's this big interconnecting system. It's interconnected to life. It's interconnected to landscapes. And this world system diagram is the very best way to just open that conversation and look at all the different interconnected things we have when we're working in the built environment. So this is everything from the availability of water to the kind of health and well-being sides to cultural values and worldviews. These are all interconnected aspects of sustainability in the built environment and general practice beyond as well. So this eventually led into online climate literacy workshops that were developed from ones I delivered in practice at the Glasgow School of Art. And these kind of contextualize the climate emergency in quite a lot of detail. So it was really like the setting of the scene and the laying of the foundation for responding. So I'd set the scene, we'd go through the science, we'd then see what was the built environment contributing, what was the impact of the built environment, and then how can the built environment respond? So it was always contextualizing contextualizing, then the impacts, and then the opportunities. So it was always geared towards action. It was never geared towards just laying out how bad things were. It was laying out how big an opportunity the built environment is always going to be. For example, we actually knocked down a building in the UK every 10 minutes. So by the end of this talk, but between 3 and 4 buildings will have been reduced to rubble. And the equivalents, if you look at the averages, and we're in a climate emergency, but that's considered normal. So it's about breaking free of that and going beyond it. So this was contributed to part of the Restored's Cost Restore project, and me and Martin Brown wrote a chapter on this guide for educators and students and practitioners. And we kind of laid out that climate literacy is a process. It's not about a certification. It's not about a tick box exercise. It's a contextual and pragmatic understanding of the implications of climate breakdown upon any given activity, its own contributions towards those implications, and recognition of where it has the potential to positively respond. So to kind of drill that down even more, it's about understanding what are the implications of climate breakdown on the buildings we are currently building, we're currently designing, we're currently refurbishing and living in. And also, what are the contributions towards worsening climate change? Where are the emissions? What's the impact on people's health? What's the impact on life beyond the building? And then looking about where it's got potential to respond. So always looking for that opportunity, that potential to do good things and positive things inside that space. So this was eventually the biggest workshop I did. So it was one with Trada, and we had about 200 staff and students from 46 different institutions in the UK. And this was just when you make this available, this is the appetite that's there. And this was quite overwhelming to know so many people were wanting to learn. And just a kind of some of the feedback as well was there was something that had never really been laid out like this before. And Hattie Hartman gave a very, very lovely positive bit of feedback there as well, which is quite nice. But part of this was seeing what was students' responses. So a big part of climate literacy is looking at the emotional response to this and how it's affecting people. It's not just about numbers. It's not just about buildings. It's about impacts upon life. So then asked students what was their personal and emotional response to the climate and ecological emergency. And this is the kind of response we got back using a word cloud. So there was a lot of frustration, a lot of anxiety. There was people feeling unsupported. And there was a lot of people, this is a real kind of like changing their life sort of project. This is huge. Some people are annoyed. Personally, for this, I feel a great deal of grief and an incredible amount of outrage for knowing that governments and corporations have known about this for in excess of 50 years and have just made the problem worse. But then from there, we moved into how will this new information actually change how we engage with the design studio? So having learned about the climate emergency and the built environment's place in it, how are you going to change? What are you going to start doing tomorrow, essentially? So lots of people went towards kind of the awareness, the education, more kind of designing for longer life buildings. Because at the moment, when we design a building, the typical lifespan of a building today is below 65 years. And that's considered long life. So the amount of wastage that's inherent in our normal in the built environment is atrocious. It's absolutely wild. And it's about changing that. And also some people wanted to work with nature, and lots of people wanted to kind of start from the beginning and embed it into the project from the very start and to just begin now, to just get stuck in and get started. And then when we asked people as a result of the workshop, what will they want to do next? The biggest response was education and educating themselves and learning more and reading. And then one of the largest ones was retrofit, which is going to be one of the biggest opportunities we have as practitioners to positively impact lives. For every $1 million that you invest in retrofit and energy efficiency, you can create 9 to 30 jobs. So when you multiply that by what's necessary, you could have, if it's part of a Green New Deal and a just transition, this could be transformative on so many different levels. It could be a public health strategy, a green job creation strategy, and decarbonisation all at once from one endeavour. And it's absolutely fantastic. But it's also accepting that lots of this goes beyond just the 3 kind of pillars of sustainability that get talked about most typically. So Daniel Christian Wall points out in his book, Designing Regenerative Cultures, which is one of the very best books I can ever recommend on this for students and practitioners, is that all design is unconsciously or consciously an expression of our theories about the world. So what is our normal? What do we expect a building to be like? What do we expect that type of building? What's that? how does that work? So we come from it with our lived experiences, and we come at it with our worldviews from our cultures as well. So what do we consider as normal? But he also points out that kind of the past design solutions were created in those as well, and they influence and reinforce those perspectives. But to keep on going on that as well, if we want to explore how to redesign all these systems we have at the moment, they're quite degenerative in terms of kind of built environment, agriculture, or transport, politics, to be very fair. How do we do that? We really have to look at lots of our kind of understanding of some sciences has been based on blanket assumptions and metaphors of things like separation and scarcity, which are really human-made in their entirety there. And it's looking at, we've got to kind of move beyond that. So it's about engaging people's worldviews and not just in terms of numbers as well. So it's quite a huge subject. Climate literacy can go on almost forever. But it's about moving from our conventional. So our conventional is doing damage by default. Buildings, as they're built, they do quite a lot of damage. So this is sometimes called the 40% industry. And that is about the 40% of carbon emissions that the construction industry has. But it's about pushing beyond that. So when we design for like sustainable design, we're actually aiming for zero. So you're going towards net zero carbon. So kind of towards net zero, you're trying to offset to make it possible. But it's actually possible to go beyond that. So more restorative design, more regenerative design. So actually designing in such a way the building is actually positive for the environment you're putting it into, and it actually positively benefits ecosystems at the same time as well, because that's entirely possible. But to set the scene, architectural education is somewhere towards the left-hand side of this graph, when realistically it could be thrown all the way to the right-hand side with just lots of energy, and there's lots of that starting to kick in as well. So just as a few kind of recommendations on where to get kind of stuck in with this, there's an incredible amount of resources that students can just pick up, many of them free. There's also lots of things that should be asked for in libraries. So even just to go through, as far as kind of the books along the bottom, every single one of these looks at climate action through a different lens, whether that be feminist-rooted climate justice, sustainable construction, degrowth, the imagination, culture and regenerative cultures and design, or on a city scale for how to see this as well. So this is being recorded. So these are all things you can access, the majority of them free as well, especially the podcasts. So thoroughly recommend those on the top left. So then kind of on to keep going as well. So talking about how do you communicate climate literacy to people out with the built environment, because that's part of the problem. We've not got this public awareness yet. So there's a fantastic thing that's been pointed out in the architecture of waste. And architects are actually uniquely placed to affect through the legibility of their work, the behaviours and policies that shape the future. We have the opportunity, and we are literally paid to do the job of illustrating and imagining what the future could be like. And that's something that we don't really celebrate enough or bring into the education. I was never once told to use my imagination in architecture school, which is pretty wild for being in there 5 years. So this was a project that was MSA Live that the Probson Architecture School did with some students. So this was Team 20 who went by this provocative they could go for, have we killed the planet? So what they were challenged to do with some input from Sam Turner and Simeon Sputnik as well was to develop accessible, localized and replicable climate literacy resources. But the important thing was these had to be able to be understood by absolutely anyone. So someone coming into learning about the climate without having gone to architecture school, or someone just starting architecture school. So when we start to look at how do you change behaviors, what factors play upon people's decision making, when you start to look at those through the kind of behavioral psychology lens, you start to see that the architectural profession can actually influence a few of these. We can't change the vast majority, but what we can do is create new normals. We can create conducive environments and infrastructures. And we can also, how we present information is incredibly important. So when we found that by presenting climate change information as graphs for 50 years all the time, we have not managed to break through that dissonance yet. So what the students actually did was above and beyond what expected. So they decided to illustrate it from someone's day-to-day life. So they produced a poster of all these illustrations to show that the climate emergency is affecting people from when they get up in the morning to when they go to bed. So from where you live and how that affects the kind of where you are. So that statistic was 1 in 5 people actually live in a region that is already seeing global warming above 1.5 degrees. And they just tied these into really beautifully illustrated graphics, and also went into some animations that, again, were above and beyond what the brief called for, just to show what the climate emergency looked like and its impact in Manchester, where they were based. So then they started to look at what's happening in Manchester and how can we tie that together? How do we communicate this? So how we actually communicate this and how we educate is incredibly important. And storytelling and narratives like that, especially ones that people can relate to and they can see tangibly in their day-to-day lives, are incredibly important. So this is a poster that they made. And also, if you scan that QR code in the recording, you can access a website they actually built as well. So just as a little extra thing there. And then the next kind of thing that I look at is I often look at the place of the imagination. And instead of simply redesigning things within the system that we're working within, to look at reimagining beyond it. So with Anthropocene Project CIC, me and Sam co-led a team at the School of Reconstruction. So the inaugural school that was online exploring reuse in the built environment and reconstruction using what already exists. So one of my favorite quotes of all time is from Rob Hopkins' book, From What Is to What If. And it lays it out in a really quite succinct way. So one of the fundamental challenges is that we need to be able to imagine possible, feasible, and delightful versions of the future before we can create them. Not utopias, but where things turned out okay. So beyond just envisioning the best case and the worst case scenario, what does it look like when we do respond to climate change, when we do implement Green New Deals, when we do challenge political systems that are inhibiting us actually taking action? So this whole exploration was challenging students to reimagine what the infrastructure of the Anthropocene could do, what it could be like. How do you change that? What do you do as the pressure points? So students in our team were invited to reimagine these infrastructures. We asked them to identify redundant, unloved, unused, or just things that are not going to be necessary in a 2-degree world where they live. So we set them the investigatory task of looking at the impact of a 2-degree temperature rise where they lived. And we had students from all around Europe and around the world as well. We had a fantastic cohort who came back with things that blew our minds in scope of creative and pragmatic, above and beyond. It was every project that was presented was about 10 times more fun than any project I was given scope to do in architecture school. And they all brought together an incredible amount of information and background. So this was just a real kind of road testing and what is actually possible in architectural education by creating that space, by providing that climate literacy and providing that support at the same time. So just to look at the next into the very near future, because there are so many things happening at the moment, it's very difficult to actually keep up. And there's this quote that I think everyone can kind of hold on to as well. So if you're asking yourself, what can I do? Marianna Marchesi says the best thing you can do is change that question to what can I do next? Because climate action is limitless, because the problem is essentially limitless. And you're not doing it yourself. There are so many people doing incredible and inspiring things all around the world at this moment in time, all working towards bringing a more kind of just and kind of future into being and into reality. And just a lot of that is through some of the work that I do is I'm hosting Scotland's first People's Assembly on climate and housing justice. So pairing climate and housing justice in a way that's participatory. So when you think about climate and housing policy, you probably think about politicians instinctively, but actually climate and housing policy affects every single person in the country. That's entirely unavoidable. So what I'm doing along with the Climate Fringe, with support with Acan Scotland, the campaign against climate change and living rent, is creating a table that's possible for people to come to for a day to discuss their lived experiences, their expertise, bring their expertise to the table, and to really look at what do housing and climate policies look like that rise to the challenge of climate change, that leave no person behind, and also put a just transition at their core. So how do we co-imagine those? What spaces do we need to get towards doing that as well? So that's something that's entirely possible and within the scope of your own action group. You could do that for Wales. You could hold Wales' first People's Assembly on a similar topic or exploring something entirely different. And then in 7 days' time, it's another global climate strike. So 2 years ago, 7.6 million people went on strike between the 20th and 27th of September. So just ask yourselves and your education, your practice, your personal lives, how are you showing up in support of this global climate strike? So that's happening, and that's something else that you can get immediately dove into as well, that's happening in just 7 days' time. But just to end on one of my favorite quotes of all time that really sums up everything about this. It's about action and changing things. But the reality is, if we're going to be changing towards a sustainable way of life, people do need to be treating each other more fairly and treading more lightly on the earth. We need to be reducing inequality, and we need to be increasing well-being. So that entails treating the earth as something loved and considering earth in every single thing we do, from food to travel to how we relate to other people and our own groups, and also our political choices on taking action as well. So just to kind of wrap that up, thank you very, very much for the opportunity to speak at your festival and the launch of your climate action group. And I can now chuck it to questions that you guys can manage however you have organized as well. I hope I've not overrun by too much.
Thank you very much, Scott, for your talk. I happened to attend one of those Trada talks that you mentioned before for the climate literacy. And I think that was kind of my moment where I started getting hooked and listening to lots of podcasts and really diving headfirst to Acan Work. So if there's any other opportunity like that in the future, I recommend everybody goes and really takes note of Scott's way of presenting and being able to honestly portray the situation we're in. And I'm really glad and so honored to have you accept our invitation to talk. I'll allow the panel to ask any questions, and hopefully some people will throw some in, but I've prepared one just personally for myself. So with the approaching work that you have and all the different things that pile up, and with COP26 coming up so soon, and our educational kind of year starting off to many students that are on this Zoom call, and maybe the Acan kind of educators workshops that happen, what can students kind of do to take charge or use their agency more, and other than general education and kind of helping themselves have the tools? But
with your agencies that you've actually been, if you've went out with the kind of what's been provided and you've got these skills around sustainable design, it's recognizing that you can immediately be putting them to use and supporting other people and helping other groups do things that they might not necessarily have access to that information. You can be bringing it into the design studio straight away. And I would thoroughly recommend, if you're handed a design brief that doesn't mention the climate crisis, to hand it back and ask for it to be changed and ask for it to take reality into account. Because we have got to the point where to not respond to this is negligence. It is not something that is optional. Many people for decades have not had the opportunity to not respond to climate change. It's been an everyday part of their lives. But when it comes to agency, you can do so many things. There is absolutely nothing stopping you hosting your own sort of people's assemblies on different things, to engaging with other activist groups, to co-hosting things with other groups, to looking where the overlap is, to engaging with other parts of the built environment. So there's lots of crossover between, for example, climate and housing justice. So the work that I did was pulling together the people that design that. So pulling together architects, pulling together trade unions and the people who'll be doing that building, and then giving a space to tenants unions. So you can be creating spaces for other people to learn. You can be creating spaces for yourself to learn, and you can be doing so many different things. Like, there is no limit on your agency. And I always stress every single time I do one of these, you have more agency than any course is ever going to tell you. There's a quote that the master's tools will never demolish a master's house. And you can apply that to many things. But it's really, you have the agency to just go out and do things. And that's, if you've ever thought, I would really like to learn about this, there's absolutely nothing stopping you in approaching a practice that you admire and asking, can you teach me and my group about this? There's nothing stopping you. There's literally nothing stopping you approaching your political representatives and asking them if they're taking this seriously, or lobbying them, or asking them to speak to you in that capacity. So I would really encourage the creation of spaces as a first step in before kind of jumping into other bits and pieces. But every single person is capable of doing that, and everyone has that agency. So I would thoroughly recommend even considering what can you do next. So but not just within the confines of your architecture school. look for how can you invite the outside world, and especially other groups who don't have the same access to the same information, the same expertise. How can you use what you have to benefit as many people? So just as a kind of meandering answer, that's probably the most I can give on that front as well.
On my meandering way of asking as well. I also wanted to first make the connection that, as you mentioned, you're a tutor and co-organizer for the School of Reconstruction, the summer course that happened this summer that just went. And through yours and Sam's unit, I was a part of the summer school, and in comparison to all the other units, there was this larger view and real sober look at the sites of extraction or methods of extraction that happened in your unit. Would you be able to comment, first of all, on these type of larger socio-political topics that need to be covered in architectural school, just to get context within units, and where in the year maybe, or how would you imagine through doing this unit, students can engage really meaningfully with these type of topics?
So I was incredibly lucky when I did an international exchange in my last year, and we had a seminar class on international sustainable development. And every week we were given a reading material. One person would present it as concisely as possible, and we would debate it and discuss it. And I learned more there than I probably did in the 4 years before it about where the built environment sat in relation to everything else. It was possibly one of the best classes I've ever taken. But in bringing in these larger issues, it's things that everything is interlinked. So everything is interconnected. Barry Commoner's four laws of ecology. Number one, everything is connected to everything else. We cannot separate architecture from the political, from the social, from the environmental. And we have this kind of really sort of the kind of the false disconnect and false boundary that is put in place to try and reduce topics and say that they don't overlap when every single thing does. But when we were imagining how do we get students to really give them space to explore the wider context beyond just a site. So we didn't prescribe anything about sites. We said we wanted to be in your locality, reusing something that's already there. But it has to be in a way that creates space for life to thrive in a 2-degree world. So we had some absolutely amazing projects, and just the ideas range from working with water to repurposing trains as disaster relief, to with a fire festival to educate on the damage being done by wildfires, but also in the prevention of carrying out traditional fire control burns, and everything in between to explore all of these incredible little points. And we really need to be giving students the space to actually use their imagination and not just be bound by a program of a brief that's probably about 10 years old and has been recycled about 20 times. And just to give students the input into their brief to talk about things that they're passionate about, to bring in things that have an impact on their lives. And because there was a really incredibly powerful moment where one student we were talking about the wildfires that were happening in their own country, and they'd mentioned this, and they'd be like, it was climate change is affecting people all the time. It's not something that we can just switch off and pretend isn't happening when we're doing projects in architecture school. So when looking at that kind of the wider socio-political lens, especially when it comes back to kind of the extraction around the built environment, and how do we really kind of reconcile the built environment with the boundaries laid out by our planet. So when you consider every single building you see, every city, every street, everything was taken from somewhere else and forced there. Everything was placed into an existing ecosystem that was interlinked to countless species that we have now forced out, and we've relocated so much material. So it's how do we really bring that in a way that's regenerative and imaginative? So when it comes to the wider and political, you have to engage the political. We need to know things to be, when it comes to kind of building regulations, and those are going to be some of the biggest campaigns ever needed around the climate movement to change regulations, to enforce them. And we can't pretend it's not happening. We cannot pretend that the system in place is not degenerative and it is not doing damage by default and getting worse. So it's about making interventions into that system and creating the space for students to design beyond the constraints of business as usual. So it's creating the space for students in architecture school to imagine if the world could be different, instead of just trying to tick the program sheet and saying, I've designed a library of X number of rooms and X number of bookcases. There should be so much more space for the imagination and for exploration at the same time.
Thank you very much. I really look forward to seeing if there is a publication with the School of Reconstruction so everybody could see the amazing work that you're referring to. And truly the Miro board that was part of the school and Scott's unit had such a liveliness and kind of deep dive that I think is very unique and really reflects on the way that you teach and speak. Scott, thank you very much. I will quickly allow everybody to have a 10-minute break and then we will continue on to the award session. That will start at 7 o'clock sharp and we'll have a short presentation from all the award winners and some announcements. And then we'll continue on to the panel. So please grab a drink. And thank you again, Scott, for your time.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I apologize. I think well, I'll pass on.
Aidana. I think I was recording as well the whole time, so don't worry.
Okay, I apologize. Slight panic. Right, so swiftly moving on. I'll now like to pass the mic to George to present his work for highly commended work. The second one, which is Harvest from a Ruin. The judging board have commended him on the great drawings and that the drawings are appropriate to the proposal and a good control of atmospherics and a broad view of sustainability and engagement with landscape and nature. Please go ahead.
Cool. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'll share my screen. 1 second. Working? Can you see that presentation?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go far away now. Yeah, so my site was in the valleys outside of Cardiff, near Pontypridd, and this is the River Taff.
1 second. Sorry, George. We don't see your work.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay. Have another go with sharing. Is that working?
It's loading, I think. Yep, perfect.
Okay.
I can see that.
I'll say that again. Yeah, so this is our site next to the River Taff outside Cardiff. And yeah, it's kind of in a valley near Pontypridd. And yeah, it's sort of occupying this kind of disused green strip alongside the river. And that's kind of the local context. Yeah, the project is focusing on a new relationship with the river and enabling people to kind of have new access. Yeah, so I kind of began by examining layers in the context and thinking about the place needing to kind of marry between the hillside and the town and allow people to kind of engage with their local environment in a new way. Yeah, so similar to the other project, water and water management became quite important because the river regularly floods and that can be quite damaging to the local area. So I was thinking about restoring a natural gradient where the site had been flattened unnaturally to make way for the kind of industrial history of the site. So it's kind of thinking about restoring that gradient and kind of being able to renaturalize the site at the same time. Yeah, so yeah, thinking about the kind of material, the wealth of materials that exist at the place and thinking about sustainability from a construction point of view and accessing materials locally. And then the process of building being something that can be sustainable in terms of sustainable community and socially sustainable. So inviting young apprentices to become part of the kind of the construction of the scheme in a sort of where it becomes like a training site. So yeah, building quite solid construction using compressed earth blocks made from soil from the riverbank, and getting the right gradient of soil and aggregate, and using a sort of local compression press that can be brought onto site, and that can be part of the whole training scheme. These Belfast trusses are made of kind of lightweight local timber, and they become part of how the scheme is made and get transported around the site and used in various places, so that you're using parts of the construction methodology as part of the kind of final part of the scheme, as well as when it's being constructed. So that doesn't really make sense, but basically reusing Belfast trusses as the formwork for the arches, as well as in the final piece on their own. So this is kind of looking inside the scheme as I'm building up the landscape, allowing the water to flow through it, and building these new levels, which can become terraced gardens, and a way of harnessing some of the leftover concrete from the industrial era and building up the landscape using that recycled concrete. So yeah, you can see how these strips are built against the existing ruins of the site, which were disused and dilapidated and become unsafe for the public. So it was kind of inserting new spaces within that. And then, yeah, sustainability, I was thinking about it from the point of view of the users, and the fact that the people are just one of many kind of users that would be occupying a kind of natural scheme, semi-urban, sort of farmland context. And so thinking about animals, all sorts of insects and trees and plants, and making space for all of those species to thrive together. Thinking about training and local users as well, in terms of farming and doing the construction, and the way that the sustainable flood management kind of is managed, and that being part of the training as well. So yeah, on plan, this is a kind of old water channel which is being restored, and then that water is filtered through the scheme back out to the river to kind of restore that natural filtration that happens through plants. And then that idea of the gradient sort of ascending the landscape, and that kind of process becoming part of how you move through the site. So the materiality kind of embedding these kind of heavy new structures using the recycled materials, embedding it within the kind of rhythm of the landscape. The challenge with compressed earth blocks was to keep the structure internal, to shelter it from potential moisture, because that's the main challenge with any kind of building with earth. And then, just these perspectives, thinking about kind of those heavy materials, making a kind of space that feels very raw, like almost like living within a cave. Kind of, it's harking back to kind of old, when we first occupied spaces within the earth. Yeah, and then this kind of perspective, thinking about how architecture can be something that grows with the landscape, and is part of it, and part of those rhythms of how nature grows, rather than something that's static and just built up and then kind of a singular narrative. Yeah, and then thinking about how seasonality would affect how the place is experienced, and trying to think about species throughout the different seasons, and what species would be able to occupy different parts of the scheme at different times of the year. Yeah, and then thinking about, so we've got these ruins which are now kind of re-established as part of the landscape, some way that's welcoming, that sort of is able to balance humans and nature, and welcome a new kind of era of sustainability in this place. Yeah, that's my project. If anyone's got any questions, please do put them in the chat and I can answer.
Thank you very much, George. Amazing work. I'd like to now announce the winner. The winner of the WSA's 2021 climate change theme will be Priyansha Kamdar, and the judges have said that the clear and well-developed narrative with a subtle approach to the definition of space in terms of territories and control was very special, and it which seems a subtext to the issues that we're also facing. Great atmospheric drawings. And I'd also like to thank Balin Murphy for being the judges and for the award. Please take it away, Priyansha. Thank you.
Thanks. Right, so I'll just share my screen. So I'm Priyansha, and my third year project was called The Anchor. So my project was really sort of based on the principles of the natures of territories and how territories define how we perceive architecture and how we want architecture to change just within sort of our little territory bubble and also beyond. So in the phase one of my project, I was looking at the territories of Treherbert, which is my site, which is in the Rhondda Valleys of Wales. So it's a very small town. And in order to sort of survey the site, I was doing it through the point of view of a German Shepherd dog that supposedly lived in Treherbert. And what this allowed me to do was to analyze the territories of Treherbert from a completely different scale. And so starting from the domestic scale all the way to something quite larger with the woods that surround this little valley town, and how the territories of the dog are then changed with every sort of change in architecture that are around it, but also with, the structural layout of the town as well. But what I was really interested in sort of analyzing was, how do these territories change in the first place? And with a dog, it's very much based on control, very much under the control of the owner. So the territories, the scale of the territories that the dog has really sort of depends on that. And I sort of really picked on that particular aspect of the nature of territories and how that's defined by conflict and control, and took that to phase two of my project. And I was really sort of analyzing how this conflict and control between the Treherbert community that wanted sort of the power or control over the forest versus Natural Resources Wales that sort of governs it right now, and how this conflict and control between the two parties is affecting the existing ecosystem that persists in Treherbert. And that's when I started to sort of set out my vision. What do I want my project to do in the end? And the idea was to use my project as a way of transitioning territories, so sort of shifting the control from this large corporation slowly towards the community, and then eventually towards the ecosystem, towards ecocentrism. What we say is sort of placing complete control to the ecology, and sort of mapping this out in various ways of how this would happen over time, and how if it would affect the town and the phases that the town would go through over the next 20 to 30 years. And in order to sort of bring this transition about, I was really keen on having a program for my project that persisted the same ideology. So that's when I started researching into linoleum leather. So linoleum leather is made through wood fiber and linseed oil to create this really beautiful ecological leather. And that was the program for my building. And what this allowed my project to do was to bring the whole community into the cycle of ecology. So the community helps with the growing of the linseed. You grow linseed all around Treherbert, and to sort of reinstate this identity. And this sort of brings about the idea that the territory of my project is not confined within the walls of my architecture. It would go beyond. It would go through the town and connect the community, the town, and my project, and then further on with the valleys, which would then lead to ecocentrism. And I did this at lots of various scales. So I was using the same methods that I did in phase one to sort of understand how territories change within my building with different occupations and different levels of control, and how these territories would then define the architecture that was around it. And this is how I started to then design the following building. And this sort of collage then shows how the leather is then embedded into the town. And you can see this brings about a complete change in the present town, something that the town can be known for and can then enjoy and actually appreciate the valleys and the source material that it gives them. And my final image would be this sort of really simple section that I did of how the project then allows for the territories of Treherbert in itself to then expand beyond its physical architecture, and how this would then go beyond the town as well, and beyond just the normal ideas of territories that we right now have. I hope that gave you a little idea of what my project was about. And if you have any questions, please pop them through. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are some amazing drawings. Could you confirm what year are you in?
Third year. I just finished third year.
Those are amazing. I can't imagine doing these in third year. Congratulations again with your award. Please do pop any questions into the chat, guys. And if Bethan, can you start preparing just for the panel that's after this? But I would say congratulations to all three of the winners and commendations. I hope that the WSA experience and going up on the exhibition has been positive. And just a reminder for everybody in the audience, the 3D exhibitions coming along, and hopefully you'll be able to walk through the renovated Butte building and see these pieces of work and spend time to look through these yourselves. Okay, thank you again, Priyansha, for your time, and George and Sarah for sending through the work. I think we'll move on to the panel. Good evening to everybody, and thank you for Marianna and for Hester and for Scott for accepting the invitation to sit into this panel and give an insight with their backgrounds and expertise that they bring to this conversation. I hope that everybody is looking forward to this conversation of just addressing how architecture is responding to the climate crisis, and then many ways and theses and rich responses that have been brought up through this. And we want to spotlight to champion, again, climate literacy within the course of architecture. Please take it away to my chair.
Hello, welcome to our panel on design for climate resilience versus adaptation. I'm Bethan. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a third year undergraduate student here at the WSA. I've been working to set up a WSA branch of the Architects Climate Action Network, which we'll be launching at the end of this panel. Thank you so much to our panelists for accepting our invitation to come today. It's an honour to have you with us. And thank you, Aidana. She's organised the whole Climate Day of the WSA Festival. Hopefully today we'll continue the conversation created by her last panel, Creative Liberty versus Sustainability, so studio teaching for the climate crisis. If you have any questions throughout the discussion, please ask them in the chat and we'll have a Q&A at the end of the panel. We bear witness to an Earth experiencing consecutive years of record-breaking temperatures and a doubling of extreme natural disasters since the early 1990s, displacing 24 million people in the last year alone. A certain amount of change is already locked in, and unless we change radically, this will only get worse. As young architects, we are entering an industry responsible for nearly 40% of CO2 emissions. It is our responsibility to protect our planet. The question is no longer if or when, but how. The topic of our discussion is design for climate, resilience versus adaptation, with a focus on what methods we can use to combat the climate emergency. For the purposes of this discussion, we have defined adaptation as a rethinking of the role of the architect, focusing on the role of climate justice and architecture's ability to facilitate societal change, and resilience as focusing on integrating climate literacy into industry, using innovation and technology to aid better design. Our panelists today are Scott McAuley. As you as you may have heard earlier, he's a climate justice activist, architectural designer, and climate literacy educator. He's founded the internationally recognised Anthropocene Architecture School, and whilst working as part of the architectural assistant with Archetype, he sits in the RIAS Sustainability Working Group and is a coordinator of the Architects Climate Action Network's Carbon Literacy Working Group. Also joining us is Marianna Marchesi. Marianna is a lecturer in architectural design here at the WSA. Her research and understanding how to engage urban communities in the circular economy investigated social innovation as a means to promote circular production and consumption practices. She has also developed a card game to engage people in visualizing a transition to a circular economy, which you can download for free from the Circubed project webpage in early October. We're also joined by PhD candidate Hester Buck. Having trained as an architect, her research focuses on the design of creative processes such as participatory events, incorporating behaviour change as an element of spatial design. The community workshops within Grangetown and at Art Urban in London, she's exploring the role of participatory design to develop green infrastructure which uses moss to improve air quality. Our final panellist is Aidana, who's a master's student here at the WSA. Her interest in architecture lies in co-design and the role of the architect beyond the delivery of projects. So to begin, if we could just go around so everyone can introduce their work a bit more, just in case anyone's just joined. Scott, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you very much for the lovely introduction as well. I am a climate justice activist, kind of first and foremost, and this threads for all of my work. I work as a Part 2 architectural assistant at Archetype, where I focus on sustainability coordination and kind of bringing high level and high scale sustainability to projects. And through Anthropocene project CIC, I teach climate literacy to practitioners and educators. The Anthropocene Architecture School was where I started doing this work. And through that, I create spaces to engage the climate emergency for kind of civil society groups and contributing supports wherever asked as well. So a little bit of all sorts.
Okay, Marianna, do you want to go next? Oh, sorry, I think you're muted.
Okay, thank you for the introduction and thank you for inviting me. I'm a researcher. I joined the school in 2018 as a Marisa Loboska-Curie fellow. Before I worked for 15 years as an architect. So I have a long experience as a professional. And working as a professional, I also acquire a specialization on sustainable architecture and sustainable building design. Because while I was working, I saw the need to acquire knowledge and understanding how to make a change, how to build a building or a portion of city that are able to be in more in equilibrium with the environment, and they are not affecting the environment or producing waste. But after a while I was working, I decided that working as an architect, it was not enough for me, because while if you're working as an architect, you develop a building, but I wanted to make a change. So I focused, I thought I would like to become a researcher, because a researcher can think about developing tool, can have a larger impact. So I took a PhD, and after my PhD, I received funding for the development of a project, thanks to the European Commission. And the project was about circular economy, how to engage urban community in the circular economy. So the circular economy seems a very far topic, because you think about economy, something, but instead this approach is quite practical, is looking at the alternative way to produce and consume, and it can affect on an economy, environment, and society. So I looked at how to engage a group of people in city, because what I discovered is the ecological impact of cities is mainly due to people behavior, so citizen behavior, how we eat, we move in the city, how we use product. So, and how we also use energy. So I try to understand how to engage and empower people in resource efficiency, how they can be part of this change, and how they can also benefit by saving resources or by reducing waste. And so my research focus on social innovation for circular economy and develop a game because gaming is an effective way to engage people in topics that can be difficult to understand. And in this way, I try to change the way in which circular economy can be proposed to people and how we can engage them in different alternative ways of producing and consuming. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Hester, do you want to go next?
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. I think, yeah, really interesting kind of, really set the scene really well in terms of sort of current situation. So I'm Hester. I'm part of the architecture collective Public Works, and I suppose our sort of byline is architecture and activism. So we do a lot of work with communities, supporting kind of grassroots action. And as part of the collective, my focus is really around kind of ecology and ecology within cities. So I'm part of a project called Urban in Poplar in East London, and then there's a twin project which AAA have in Paris. And at Urban, we're exploring rural ideas within an urban context, thinking about reuse within an urban context, and also thinking about resilience and what resilience is. And through this project in Urban, I've been developing a prototype of a moss wall. The idea is it can improve air quality by kind of cultivating and growing moss within the wall. And this is really part of the way we work at Urban, is developing and building prototypes with communities as a way of exploring ideas to sort of understand our place within a sort of an ecosystem and environment. And in this case, with quite a polluted environment just off the A12. And then thinking about how this kind of DIY prototyping can be a way to collectively explore these ideas and develop new solutions, develop greater insight into how we can start to build, in this case, with air quality and air as a material of our city in mind. So from this work, I've now started a PhD through practice. So it's looking at the work I've been doing in London, but also developing new prototypes in Cardiff, in Grangetown, with the communities there as well. Kind of continuing this conversation about air and thinking about how we, with kind of residents in Grangetown, and we can start to kind of develop new prototypes and based on this sort of collective exploration into air and moss as a sort of more than human companion in this journey. So moss, like us, breathes, it's breathing in the air, and thinking about how we can think and feel through plants as a way of kind of understanding where we are within our cities, how we exist with them, and how we can kind of cultivate new ways of living. So like you said in your introduction, I'm really interested in ideas around sort of behaviour change and citizen science, and how we could think about how those could inform architectural practice, and how this way of working could be seen as sort of testing it as a new form of practice, or kind of a development in the way we approach practice.
Oh, thank you. That's really interesting. And it's really interesting how sort of you both were exploring elements of communality and how architecture can affect that. Hopefully it'll make for a really exciting panel. Aidana, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I go by the pronouns of she, her, and I'm a last year master's student at the WSA. I originally come from Kazakhstan. My interests in architecture lies in co-design and the role of an architect beyond the delivery of projects. And as an individual, my recent involvement with Acan has meant that I finally met people and heard the conversations about that I've been waiting to happen in front of me about climate change. And this in turn kind of revealed to me the work and the resources that are being shared through many groups and action groups within Acan. I wanted to involve more of my cohort and kind of share this to the students that I was studying with. I've attended Scott's talks and many other webinars and podcasts, which really invigorated me and wanted me to, constantly share and delve more deeper into this. And this also led me into entering with my team and receiving first place at the Home of 2030 Riverside Sunderland Challenge to design net zero carbon homes, where I try to organize an excellent lecture series as part of this. I was also very lucky to get into earlier speakers Duncan's Summer School of Reconstruction and Scott's, and with those, with another lecture series there. And I think that opened my eyes to the disconnect that industry and education have, where many people were very eager to share their work and really shed light upon the innovations and new ways of applying architecture. But in education, we weren't taught this. So I think as my background, I just really want to make a call to agency as well, like Scott, in the cohort as a student voice, and through organizing the earlier panel earlier this year of creative liberty versus sustainability. I have the pleasure to also have the opportunity to make today and facilitate more of these necessary conversations at university. So yep, this is my not very much of professional background, but my background as it stands.
Thank you. That was great. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us again today. So to start off the panel, we're going to pose the question: do you think that the architectural profession should be combating the climate emergency through methods of adaptation or resilience? And where do you feel your work lies within the spectrum? So if anyone wants to go first. Yeah, Scott, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think in terms of to provocative opening, as far as adaptation versus resilience, we've been told by the IPCC we need a little bit of everything. So it's very scattershot. Catherine Hayhoe describes it as there's no silver bullet, but there's silver buckshot, and there's lots of little solutions. It's about mobilizing as many as possible and creating the space where it's possible for things to happen, creating space for overlap. So the work that I do, it sort of depends what job I'm currently wearing the hat for. In practice, I'm bringing in that the broader understanding of climate literacy into a project and helping to pull in all the research I've done or things that I know or things that I've seen. So it's that enabling things to happen and that conduit, which it sounds sort of like it's happening at the moment. And then with the Anthropocene projects, that's very much engaging with universities and practices. So that's helping people to identify where the gaps are to them starting to use these solutions, to finding out what is possible. So for a lot of practices I go to, I find that even sustainability teams are not totally sure what they can do or what's been done before. So there's so many stories of absolutely incredible projects happening, probably very close to you that you've not seen before, that are being done as we speak. There is one living building challenge registered building in the UK. There's now a living retrofit project. So a retrofit that was done in America that's net positive. And that's not broken into the industry yet, but that's possible. And then the work I do with the Anthropocene Architecture School is just provocation, disruption, and noise, typically making spaces. So holding the space for other people to share, to learn, and to really catalyze and energize, and to really stress that the agency everyone has is above and beyond what you are given in architecture school. And when I was in architecture school, I was actually told, had I considered going into engineering, because I wasn't going to get to do that sustainability in practice. That just wasn't going to happen. And that was 2 years before the IPCC report came out and said, this has to happen now, immediately. So that's my work in that sort of regard, is creating the spaces for people who would never overlap, who would not have access to that information, to those connections, and using the social license of the architect and taking the kind of the historically, socially, the architect has been seen as a kind of a conduit between different parts of the construction industry, of government and policy. You're in the room on many occasions, and you can't always raise your voice when you're in the room. But even now it becomes easier. But even if you're not in the physical room, you can always raise your voice and take a stance. And the architect does have the ethical duty to the public, to the planet beyond that as well. So it's exercising the social license you have to bring people together that would not overlap. So the kind of example I would give would be for the People's Assembly in Scotland, we've got Friends of Your Scotland's Just Transition kind of campaigner coming. We've got the tenants unions, we've got trade unions, we've got architects, we've got tenants. Those people are typically not given a seat at the policy table, and they are never given the agency to explore what the policies that actually impact their life look like, what they feel like, what they're imagined like. So it's creating the space for people to see what is possible and to kind of imagine the future now, and to see, we know if we go beyond the system that we are currently restrained by, this whole kind of building must be for profit and kind of land banking, volume built housing that's terrible for our health. Kind of 40% of all the money we spend on healthcare is due to our buildings. And it's just, with the work that I do, it's creating the spaces for people to feel energized, to feel empowered, to see what's possible. And it's a hell of a lot of storytelling. It's lots of this has been done, and it's inspiring, it's fantastic. And sharing those examples. I'm incredibly lucky that with this work, I get to do lots of research and I get to speak to so many people, not even intentionally. Sometimes I just get really random, weird emails, but it is just, I get to have these conversations and I get to learn, but then I get to share that onwards. So I would describe the work that I do as a catalyst. So as much as it's a conduit between things, it's also the kind of the embodiment of my impatience on the inaction on climate change and just kind of working through that as well as a starter.
Oh, yeah, did you put your hand up, Hester? Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was thinking this idea, I think your kind of framing is really interesting, this idea of resilient materials and adaptive practice and the relationship between materials and practice. So maybe just starting with the resilient materials. I suppose in terms of my work, which is very much about kind of a reflection on this one-to-one making that I've been doing around these kind of these sort of participatory workshops of green walls, which improve air quality. So to give a bit of background, this idea of using moss within walls was something that was developed by a project called 100 Trees, which is a kind of a German group, and they developed these moss walls that are the equivalent of planting 100 trees in their kind of ability to filter air. And I was working with the sustainability department in the University of East London, and they were telling me about this project and were saying there's kind of lots of capacity, but very little research in moss. And 100 Trees are doing amazing kind of research around the kind of impact of these benches that they build and the kind of the amount of air quality, the kind of capacity to improve air quality. But I was really interested as a designer looking at these benches and thinking about them as kind of designed objects. So the benches have computers within them that measure the moisture levels on the moss and are kind of watering the moss. They've got fans which are drawing in the air to filter it through the kind of the system. So they're relatively high tech. They take quite a lot of energy, quite a lot of kind of high tech materials, and they're quite expensive. So it's £30,000 for a moss bench. And so my work was kind of in response to this, of thinking, we can't all spend £30,000 on a moss bench. We need this. The kind of action we need needs to be DIY. It needs to be something you can do yourself, that you can kind of tinker with in your garden, that you can put up. And that's how you get really large scale change. It's not a kind of a high tech luxury. It's a kind of highly accessible necessity that we're all kind of implementing. And when we look at something like air quality within cities, the kind of level, the scale of the problem, green technology is never really going to meet that scale of the problem. It's definitely not going to meet it if it kind of costs this much money. So I think when you think about, thinking about resilience, what those resilient materials are and how we approach resilience. I think there's also something really telling and really interesting at the moment within kind of materials and sustainable materials, the kind of this idea of a kind of technological solution, and that there is a kind of there is in a way a solution out there, and that we can invest in it. And as Scott said, I totally agree. It's a scattergun effect. There is no technological solution. It's about large-scale behaviour change. It's about governmental change. It's about change in practice. And it's about change in terms of the materials we're using. And it's only really by thinking about how we move between all of those elements, are we really going to be able to affect change. And so I think this idea of kind of solution thinking, of the kind of like something we can invest in to solve it, opposed to actually just spending time with a problem, spending time in our, Donna Haraway talks about this idea of staying with the trouble. It's not a kind of solution thinking, it's actually about kind of staying with the trouble of air quality. So I suppose the other element of my research, which I think kind of maybe is more around this idea of kind of adaptation, both in terms of how I adapt my practice, how kind of I think about that, and but also how how we as a group, the participatory groups I work with, residents, but also people from local housing authorities or the council, how do we start to adapt and change together as a group as we learn about air quality through these kind of prototypes, is really key, because in reality, these kind of green infrastructures aren't actually ever going to be the solution. And it's only about these two things going in hand, thinking about how does behaviour change also feed into the kind of the architecture we're kind of proposing, and that it's only by kind of thinking about both of those elements as a facet of the kind of the city, the role of the architect to think about both how people move and exist in the city, as well as the kind of the spaces in which they're moving, and how do we think about those two things feeding into one another. And again, I think that means quite a radical shift in terms of what we think the role of the architect is, that actually maybe we build a lot less, but actually we talk and we test and we try a lot more. And that there isn't a kind of a material solution out there to this condition, but it's a continual process of kind of observing what's happened, observing what we're doing. Is it good enough? Can we do it better? And again, I think just to finish, I think that's why I'm really interested in this idea of prototyping. Something being in process, that it isn't yet finished. We're constantly kind of reviewing, adapting and improving our practice. And that's something we as architects are doing, but we're also inviting kind of a wider group of kind of participants, residents, because they're the local experts on the ground who really understand their air, they really understand their environment, to that conversation.
Thank you, that was fascinating. Does anyone else want to jump in?
I can add my experience. I'm teaching at the third year design unit, and I'm engaging students in climate change and sustainability. What I experience in this 2 years of working as a lecturer is the need for engaging students in design for sustainability. That is a very complex, very big umbrella of approaches. You have a lot of approaches, but is necessary to deal with climate change. Is important also, is starting to be important also considering aspect of resiliency. So from my point of view, you have sustainability, and that is a big area of designing. And resilience is an additional dimension that is coming to become important. While sustainability, you design for building an equilibrium between the built environment and the natural the building and the environment. In resilience, you design you look at a situation in which there is a change, and so there is the equilibrium is not there, and you are going to see what is going to happen and how the building is reacting. So I think regarding my experience, I try to engage students from the technical point of view. You have to build on the technical aspect and knowledge. That is essential. But in order to create change, to design for a change, you have to move from a technology-oriented approach to a social-oriented approach. You have to combine together. So, for example, it's not enough designing an energy-efficient building. You have to imagine how to engage people for saving energy and adopting a different behavior. So in some way, you can imagine your building and your technology, but you can imagine service, or you can imagine a different way to manage energy in the neighborhood, for example. And that is a different way of thinking. You have to link aspects at a different level, and adopting a multi-level design approach. That is essential. And the other aspect that is complex is combining different knowledge. So especially as an architect and a designer, I see the need of having a different background, a multidisciplinary background, so a good technology background plus knowledge about social engagement, or way to also, for example, building service or engaging people in sustainability. But on the you have to have a good background in different topics. While on the other side, I think you should count on specialists, because what is essential is having measure. So you can analyze the problem and you can show benefit and show how the thing can change. And this makes the difference with politicians. So you can go to a politician and say, look, this has changed in this way, so we can change this regulation in this way. So I think what is important is combining together a large architect with a large background, with specialists, and research with design, and asking for changing, but you have to provide proof of change, that the change can make a difference. So what I observe is a growing tendency in architectural firm of building research section plus also design section, because in this way they can develop also new approach, and also building on proof and showing results. But is my experience.
I would say, I'll just jump in straight away with my work, which is very limited at this stage, but through this year out and the experience in firms, and through actually an experience of building the anti-pavilion with the Pro Bunny Rabbit Collective, Pink Bunny, which I actually saw through Scott's stories, which he shares and keeps very active on the Anthropocene Architectural Instagram account. Everybody should follow. Well, through that experience, I'd also say that we questions a lot the role of design, and whether the architect can assume a role of activist wholly, and like the work from Studio Bark with the boxes, and how people could handcuff themselves through the box, create larger structures, create the tables. Hopefully people can understand what I'm referencing. I hope I'm not like, but they have this one module which is made out of ply, and the You Build, I think is their module called. And they've done the No More Building as Usual summer camp this summer as well. Unfortunately, I didn't get a space, but it was a module where you can stack and create bigger structures, which they used for the XR protests, and people could handcuff themselves and to another person. So therefore, it'd be a lot harder for officers to take them off grounds. And also the beacons, which are these bamboo cross-tensile integrity structures. And they won the Anti-Pavilion project, which is a competition by a developer properties company, Shiva. And they have a competition annually. It's very popular between London Hackney architects. And so that was one this year. And the role where art kind of acted as activism, and it was kind of perching on the canals of Hackney and exploring the kind of the role that the designer had in that instance. For me, this summer has a lot been kind of reflecting upon my own role as a student. And of course, as a student, I don't sit between adaptation or resilience. And again, with education, there is the question of, do you prescribe the students what role an architect should play in projects, or do they frame it themselves and build it within their theses? And the role of resilience, I think our framing of it in this panel looks more at the tools that architecture and architects are given between building. Of course, all the consultants, engineers, and other team members will also have the same tools, and like Revit, this kind of one language to be able to integrate different thinkings, is also brought into question of whether we can find one method to be able to translate that with each other. But my own work doesn't lie in any of these, but I continue to question these as a student. And again, I should be choosing what projection I go into when I'm completing my part 2 and hopefully going into industry with more tools. I'll go back to Bethan.
If anyone else has anything they want to add, if you just pop your hand up, otherwise I can move on to the next question. Okay. Yeah, Scott.
I really like the fact that the threads that run through every single one of us that spoke was that kind of participatory in the behaviour change. And it reminds me, there was a study done a couple of years ago, and 62% of the changes for the UK to get to net zero are behavioural and societal. So like technology is in no way the biggest barrier. The biggest barrier is how we engage with people and how we give people not just the agency, but the means and the literacies and the understanding. And sometimes like that kind of citizen science tools, like I've never heard of that before. It's incredible. I've seen it done in other places, but engaging people with their built environment and really to understand that and to bring in the role of the architect. And because the architect is no longer that kind of master builder who definitely understands how everything stands up and can tell you anything. And it's not about asking people to learn everything. It's about everyone framing how they practice themselves. And even as an example, I got my first job in architecture partly because I framed what I wanted to do was compassionate design. And it turned out that was one of the director's thesis kind of dissertations, was what is a compassionate architect? And just in verbalizing, articulating what I wanted to do, that made another connection with someone else. And we can do so much through, like, even in writing, quite a lot of the work I end up doing is in writing and responding to things. And we can share so much through the kind of, even just our opinions. Every essay you write in architecture school is an opportunity to really deep dive into a subject and to even go completely off piste, take the brief and just kind of like, don't even distort it, just break it, run and do something different and use your imagination in that place. But that part of involving people and the framing of practice is so special. And you can do so many different things. Architecture gives not just the course, but the people you work with. You have the tools to do more than just put up buildings. You can be doing an incredible variety of things. And I think just to stress that everyone, even to play off that I've been asked to help contribute to, there's a board game is being made to talk about climate action and the city. So I'm going to make that introduction, if you don't mind, Marianna, as well. I will pass you along. Simeon in Birmingham is looking at a very similar framing and involving other people. So even just in the serendipity of bringing together this panel, there's so many different overlaps. And I spent a bit of time at Project Bunny Rabbit as well. And it was a fantastic place to learn about how tensile bamboo works. And now my housemate is bursting out laughing as well. But yeah, I will throw you back so they can contain themselves.
It's really interesting how you both sort of started developing sort of games as a way to engage the wider community. Does anyone else want to jump in?
Yes, I can. I can maybe speak about gaming. I think it's an amazing tool to engage people. What I would like to make a premise. I think it's important to not only engage people, but empower people, because the empowerment is a way in which you give them power, skill, knowledge, but also they can be benefit from, for example, you help them to save money. For example, there are initiatives like Library of Things. They are called social innovation. I think that maybe it's something that can be interesting to know. Social innovation are intervention in which the people is engaged in group. So they are more keen to be engaged. And through this initiative, they change their behavior. So especially in my case, I explore production and consumption. So they are projects in which people work together and change their practice of producing and consuming. While they are changing their way to behave, they also learn skill, or they save money, or they have their personal interest is combined with their environmental and social interest. So in some way, you achieve a big results. And in my research, I built this game in which people are looking to develop circular family. Circular family are family in which each member perform a specific activity. Make, take, make, use, and consume. And they perform this activity through a specific intervention of social innovation. That is the game. I will test the game in September, end of September, October. So I would like to see playing with people if they are in some way more able to understand this idea of resource circularity, and moreover, more keen to develop initiative for an alternative way for producing and consuming.
Thank you. I'm a bit mindful of time, so I'm just going to push on to the next question, unless anyone has anything they're desperate to jump in with. So when we were sort of curating the questions for this panel, we thought we had to acknowledge that we can't really have this discussion without acknowledging climate justice movement and how climate change is going to affect and is affecting the global majority disproportionately. I think this ties in really well with what you were saying, Hester. Do you think that a focus on resilient architecture risks creating a wealth barrier to sustainable design? And if so, how can we shape our response in order to create a more equitable built environment? Yeah, if anyone wants to jump in, please pop your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's really, I think, this idea of kind of like who's making architecture, how it's made, and the kind of embedded cost of that architecture and how we think about who has access to it, I think is really important. Just quickly, I've also been thinking in terms of this idea of resilience as well. We've at Public Works, we've talked a lot about this idea of resilience as well. And there's, sort of, I suppose, within trends of language used within sort of alternative practice or sort of sustainable practice. So started with the idea of sustaining to keep it as it is. And then this idea of resilience came in, that actually we don't live in status. Systems are always in change and flux, and that's really healthy. But there is a point at which you can push the system beyond its capacity, and it is no longer resilient to bounce back. But I think there is also something that the kind of term resilience also started to come through at about the same time, kind of austerity. And I think there's something very defensive about resilience as well, and about kind of protecting yourself from something, which, it's not an easy position we find ourselves in. But I also think what I've really enjoyed across the panel is the kind of the joy. Actually, this is a really creative moment, and this is a really positive moment of change. And it's about imagining a new future. It's not protecting ourselves against something kind of looming, but this can also be extreme kind of creativity. So there is something really interesting, I think, in terms of how we kind of frame talking about something being this sort of defensive. And then I suppose what's quite interesting now, which again, Scott kind of touched on, this idea of kind of regenerative. It's not just enough we have to make things better than they are. And actually our actions, our ability to design can improve. It's not just about reducing our kind of negative impacts. And then I also think it's a kind of another parallel conversation, again, as a sort of like interspecies. And so thinking about how do we think in a more than human way about the city, which was lovely the way your kind of students were thinking about this. Again, as a kind of maybe shift away from the kind of defensive idea of being resilient to the forces of nature, that actually we need to open ourselves up and see ourselves as a very small element with a kind of like within a wider kin, a wider family of the city, which is vastly more than human. So it's a bit of a kind of a tangent, a kind of a parallel kind of conversation. But I think what your point about this idea of what are the kind of barriers, the kind of the effect of climate change on the global south, again, I think that even plays out in a kind of hyper local scale within cities. When you look at, I mean, I'm interested in kind of, because I think air quality it's what we experience every day, and it is our air that then connects us to climate. So it's this very kind of intimate and direct way of thinking about our ecology. But even at the scale of the city, the most polluted areas of the city are also generally have the kind of lowest house prices, often the highest diversity, and are facing the like largest social economic challenges. And so the link between social and environmental justice, I think, plays out at every scale, at the scale of the city and globally as well. And so it's so important that these two things go hand in hand, and that when we talk about kind of environmental justice, the kind of the social justice is also kind of part of that solution. And again, I think to kind of, go back to the sort of, I think the real theme between all of us talking is the kind of that need for working with people and bringing a kind of a network and a group beyond kind of along this journey, and learning together as a group, I think, is so important. And really kind of framing that kind of beyond just your sort of like global kind of community as well as your local one in terms of climate.
If it's okay, could I just ask a question within the panel to the panel? Would you be able to say, Hester, to what degree do you incorporate maybe like the works of ethnography and looking at the site? You mentioned about the quality of air, usually in places of deprived.
Ethnography. So I suppose, I mean, in a way, I feel, it's also where I am in my PhD, kind of trying to like narrow myself down in terms of like standing on other people's shoulders. But I this idea of sort of, poor air is generally in ex-industrial areas and that's also where our large-scale kind of road systems are. It's also at the moment when we look at somewhere like London, the kind of capitalist consumption of the city, the sort of cannibalism of where we're knocking down houses is often in the poorest areas, and so that will also, construction is the second biggest cause of poor air. At the moment, I'm sort of looking at how you can sort of tell the story of a place through air, and how you can, by tracing the kind of air quality, we could start to kind of unpack these sort of social yeah, as you say, like ethnographic sort of narratives. I don't know if I really answered the question.
Yeah, I think that was a really good response. Does anyone else want to leap in on the original question or to follow that up? Scott, I think you have your hand up.
Oh, yeah, I would definitely follow on from that with the kind of, we need to be looking at the kind of the more than human side, because when you look at kind of with regenerative design and what's possible when like elements of kind of regenerative agriculture, when you look at what is possible when we steward land instead of just extracting from it. So that's a really key point. And then resilience is quite defensive. It's more, I think if we there was a really lovely phrase that was used in the Netherlands around some research projects, and it was the transformational capacity of a building. So you design it to be able to be adapted, to be able to be taken apart. You design in such a way that you can use, there's actually algorithms that can work out how reusable is this building before it's even built. So we really need to be going into using technology, but also the social side is so important. Climate and social justice are absolutely inseparable. And when you look at the historical context, about 92% of historical emissions that put us above 350 parts per million came from the global north. The global south was responsible for just 8. So that was a study that came out last year, but that's just to put it into numbers. But when you look at the human impacts, the impacts on life, that is something that we don't see as working in the built environment in the UK. We don't see the impacts of what we specify. We don't see where the sand is extracted from. So we actually have a sand shortage globally. And the extraction of sand has been effectively terraforming and changing how rivers run, stopping how systems work, making coasts more vulnerable to climate change. And we don't see that from where we are positioned. If we are positioned in the UK, we've been really geographically insulated from the impacts of what we've been doing. And it's really about engaging with that in a really honest way that's open to being spoken to and to learn. And there is a real, in terms of the solutions, there is a fantastic description of it. There is actually a term called cognitive apartheid. And it's when technologies, typically of the poor, are looked down on by a more supposedly technologically advanced elite. And that's when you get lots of Indigenous cultures have had incredible responses to working with their environments for thousands of years. And when we've let the exportations, particularly from kind of Europe to our international stylings of how every building in the world should be and how you should use external systems mechanically to moderate indoor temperatures, ignoring how the climate works, ignoring reality essentially. And then we really need to embrace what's being done around the world in terms of sustainability. So there's a fantastic group. If you get the chance to get a lecture series in, invite Decolonize Architecture. They were incredible. And they do a Technology Tuesday where they take an example of a technology from an Indigenous culture or around the world, and they platform it and explain how it works. Because we look at sustainability from a technological solution-based method most of the time. And that kind of, that's not achievable the way that wealth has been hoarded effectively in the global north. And yeah, that we really, the fact that we now have billionaires going off into space for 5-10 minutes, whilst most people, that money could effectively pay for the UN Sustainable Development Goals in a year. You could pay for that. If that happened every year, it'd be paid for. But it's really engaging people and the empowerment side. So it's not just there are solutions, it's there are things within reach that you can do so you feel as if you can participate and creating the space for people to feed in. So I think someone asked a question about kind of how do we get government to engage with building regulations? So lots of that is the kind of participatory democracy and looking at models that range from kind of citizens assembly and downwards to having, when you inform people about the issues and give them the space to discuss and to ask questions and to learn, you get incredible results. So in Scotland, we had a climate assembly. And when 100 people with no built environment background went away and got taught by experts, they came back, 98% of them said and agreed all existing buildings in Scotland should be retrofitted by 2030, not 2050. And that's people who had no prior background. So it's about informing the public and creating the spaces to access that education and to have that, not just the performative influence on democracy we have, Because at the moment, we are not really governed by consent. We vote every 5 years and then they run around and do ridiculous nonsense and money goes missing and etc. But it's just having spaces to really give people power. Power is such a key part in this, and acknowledging that different people have had power over and some have had power with and for is so important as well. It's that looking at the kind of learning from historical activism and organizing and bringing that into how we're engaging with and for people, and kind of that sense of stewardship of our, not just the built environment, but more than human, kind of not just people and planet, but life and planet, and rephrasing that in architecture. Because if we just talk about people and planet, we discount every other species in the world, which there, before we kind of got rolling with so much industrialization, there was infinitely more. And it's a real tragic loss. And it's engaging with the emotional side of climate change as well, and really recognizing it does have an emotional impact. And again, this is I've kind of lost the question in my tangent somewhere, and it's just kind of ended up here. So I will stop.
So Marianna, do you have any sort of input on how you think resilient architecture can create a wealth barrier, or if it can?
I think but I agree with other speakers. So again, sustainability, I think, and resilience are complementary. They need to work together. On aspect that I would like to highlight is the fact that resiliency maybe need to be combined with a more focus-oriented, society-oriented approach, like the growth approach that look at the society and see and understand how society affects the environment, because the resilience is looking at the environment and looking how the building is related to the environment, and how it behavior in relation to the environment and a change. While I think you need, however, to consider aspects about society and capitalism mode, environmental justice, power relation. So I think again the technical oriented approach should be combined with a social oriented approach. And there are a lot of approaches. I don't think there is one the best, but we need to include them in our discussion and our thought. And final conclusion from the good point from my point of view is the climate change the common architectural practice and bring research close to design. And that is something that I think can provide, can make a change.
Thank you. This conversation has gotten somewhere really interesting. We've run a little bit over time, so I'm going to open up to the Q&A now. If anyone has any questions, they can pop them in the chat. Otherwise, I have a couple prepared, so I'll jump in while we're waiting for people to type in the chat. So I don't know if anyone caught this morning's lecture from Duncan Bracken-Brown, but he was exploring some really interesting methods of developing a waste reuse infrastructure. So Marianna, this seems to link into your work with this sort of idea of circularity. What role does everyone think that a retrofit can play in our climate?
Could you repeat what role?
So what role do you think that retrofitting, I think we touched on this earlier, what role do you think that retrofitting is going to play in our climate response?
I think retrofitting can play a big role. I think it offers a chance to reuse material component and rethink way to reuse them. And so we cannot throw away everything. But we can think about way to salvage material. There are very interesting projects developed, for example, in Denmark, that are looking at the building as material bank. They use material that are there and imagine a different way to use them. Obviously, we need to consider energy performance, other aspects, but I think designer can have in this looking at this material bank can envision a different way without thinking we need to destroy everything and rebuild. That is not the right approach. And in this way we can, one, reduce waste. The other is reduce raw material that we are using, but also we can probably save money if done in some way. And also it offers a new job, because imagine instead of destroying everything, you can, for example, I saw a project in which brick have been cut and developed and have been employed in panel to rebuild new building. In this way, yes, you can recover material and people can acquire new skill and in this way have a different role in the construction site.
Thank you. Scott, you have your hand up. Do you want to jump in?
Oh, I would absolutely love to. Retrofit is one of my favorite things. It is, when you look at it from a human perspective. So in retrofit and reuse, we can really it's not just like resources are incredibly important, but when you want to ground it in people's lives, you go straight to things like fuel poverty. And when it comes to retrofit, it's a basic public health response. So much in like my home country, 1 in 10 homes are affected by damp in some way, shape, or form. It's been proven in the UK that there's links between new builds and asthma. And it's really, how do we reuse what's already there? And it will generate incredible number, not just jobs, but jobs for life, and not just jobs that are haphazard. And you've got towards the typical kind of, the construction industry is very haphazard and people getting consistent work and lots of trade. So deconstruction will become one of the biggest industries in the UK easily. The construction industry is huge. But in the construction industry, we spend 0.2% of our money on research and development. We don't do enough research whatsoever. But if we start to look at it as a source for that, and there's about to pick numbers out of my head, I can remember Scotland, the UK is between 26 to 28 million homes. Their retrofit is non-negotiable if we want to hit climate targets. We cannot hit any meaningful climate target unless we retrofit those homes. So that if you start to look at that through the framing of, say, a Green New Deal type framing. So you're looking at public health, you're looking at creating lasting jobs, you're looking at social justice, you're looking at helping the people who are already feeling the impact of this the most. So you're going to help people who are you're providing homes that are homeless. We have so many derelict buildings in the UK. It's an absolute travesty. And the number of empty homes outweighs the needs. And we really need to start talking about, not just for retrofit, but likely for the reacquisition of social housing and kind of land banking and just sitting on homes, because for a retrofit, you can do so much for people's health. And also in the empowerment side, there are so many trades that when you talk about a just transition, so putting climate justice and social justice at the core of responding to climate change, retrofit has the biggest potential. There are so many jobs that need to be created. A report the other week, came out in June, says the construction industry is going to have to at least double in size. That's an incredible. So our government loves to talk about creating jobs. They have never once talked about that on a public stage or engaging properly. So we've got this incredible opportunity that everything already exists. All the buildings are there. The amount of work comparable to trying to build all these new builds is significantly less. But the place of the designer is in the assessment, the delivery, like the kind of the coordination of these sorts of things. And architects are going to be working with more existing buildings than new buildings very, very, very fast. And that's, again, it's a non-negotiable. If we want to hit any meaningful climate target, that has to happen. It's not even a case of when, it's a case of how soon. So it's not enough, but it has to happen. And the Committee on Climate Change has actually said we are further behind in terms of adaptation and resiliency than we were 5 years ago. So the framing is we have this incredible opportunity to change people's lives. The people doing the building, designers are going to have, if the construction industry doubles in size, that's double the work. Architects can maybe worry a little bit less about finding work to do. So much has to be done. And if we look at it as that opportunity and not as a hassle, you can flip the framing. So I like to invert the kind of massive problem into massive opportunity. And that's what the architect can do. That's that we need to be illustrating that future loudly, delightfully, irresistibly. And that's not something we're doing just yet. So that's my kind of take on what you can do with it.
Thank you. Adriana, do you want to jump in? I think we're running out of time.
I'll just say that education needs to reflect that as well. Last point. And then go ahead, Bethan.
Okay. We are a bit short of time, but really quickly, just because it's a bit of a heavy topic, if we just go around and say sort of one sentence each on sort of what's giving you hope in combating the climate emergency. Anyone wants to go first? Scott, do you want to go first?
Sure, why not? I think I kind of stumbled across it whilst trying to articulate it this a while ago, but there's this huge emergent potential in people and in people's willingness to do things for the sake of everyone else. So altruism is a real thing, but people will do incredible things when asked to step up. And we have the biggest step up of all time. And the thing is, so many solutions already exist. I could literally go on for about 4 hours about buildings, projects, examples, things that I've seen, books, films. People are doing amazing things. And what gives me a lot of hope is that we can just be sharing these every single day. And you could easily find something to amaze you and inspire you once a day, very easily. There's that many of them. But what gives me hope is that there is so much being done. And in the built environment, there is the biggest opportunity out of it's a 40% industry. I would like a future where it was at least -10 of carbon emissions. And I think if we frame it properly, it could get there. It's got the means. So just really reframing that and looking at construction as one of the biggest opportunities for environmental justice, public health, and a just transition as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think similarly, I think there is so much there's so much energy and creativity in this discussion at the moment around climate change and how we respond. I think it's a really young and it's a really vibrant discussion. I also think it's really radical. It's about totally rethinking how we live, how we relate, how we think about the way we work, the houses we live in, how we relate to one another. And so I think it's a moment of real change. And I think it's really, really exciting for a kind of maybe generation a little bit younger than me, but that they are going to really bring in that change. And I think we are at the breaking point, we're at the tipping point, but that's when the most radical, kind of most exciting creative solutions come forward. And that's when we really start to kind of rethink how we live. And I suppose, again, going back to that point, the kind of relationship between environmental and social justice, I think when I kind of in the approaches and in the kind of energy and care that is kind of being placed on environmental justice, social justice is also part of that. And so I think it's going to be a big societal shift for the better. And I think it's really exciting that it's happening now.
Thank you. Marianna, do you want to sort of wrap up your thoughts?
Yes. I would like to encourage everyone to look at everyday life, starting from there, because we are an architect, we have a a big opportunity, but also we are citizens. And I think the big difference can be done every day, looking at what you buy, what you eat, how you move in the city. What if you repair your object or item that you buy, if you extend the life of your product as much as possible. But if everybody is behaving, try to save resources, but also look at way to reduce waste, can make a very big difference in a brief, shortly, and after that, as an architect, we have a great opportunity. But as a citizen, we have an everyday opportunity.
Thank you. Aidana, do you want to quickly summarize what you've taken away from this panel?
What gives me hope and what I would like to say as a reflection is that through my maybe now 1 year work with Acan and kind of reflecting on my role as what I want to do with my education and architecture, I have found a voice through which I can express my impatience and the want to organize both panels like these two, and this day especially, just getting more of these speakers to talk to the people that I hope are going to join me on this journey, and to take climate literacy very seriously, especially with all the new board meetings and everything that we need to do for our part 3, which is now solidified. So take more of my colleagues on board before it's too late and before they start entering the industry as fresh graduates and young architects, to use these newfound tools and skills to influence our work for the better and to influence our firms and our studios and wherever we work. Hopefully more diverse than that, again, just to touch on that, and to do that more positively and towards the direction that we want to be in.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for talking today. It's been really inspiring to hear kind of how much everyone really believes in how much we can change as a society, and hearing all these different theories about how we can do that. Sort of following on from what you were saying, Aidana, about being able to find your agency as a student through Acan. I think if I can share my screen now, would be a good time to launch our WSA Acan group. So I'll just share it now. There we go. Can everyone see that?
Okay.
So WSA Acan is an offshoot branch of Acan and SUCAN, which is the Student Climate Action Network. We're a community of educators and students working together to raise awareness of how our profession can combat the climate crisis, and to campaign for curriculum change and a climate literate education. We're really lucky to be studying at the WSA, where sort of ethical and environmental considerations are pushed, but there's still a long way to go before sort of our education is fully equipping us to be the sort of architects we'll need to be to combat the climate emergency. And a big part of why we set up WSA Acan is so that as a student body, we can voice where we feel that need is not being met. And so that WSA Acan can also help bridge that gap. So as part of doing that, we're organising student-led workshops, lectures and panel discussions, as well as sharing resources that other people have already prepared. As I think is evident from this panel, there's already so much information out there. And finally, we're hoping to campaign for a wider cultural shift in institutional response across Cardiff University to ensure that the whole institution is really meeting the urgency that the situation needs to be responded with. And sort of our final reason why we're setting up WSA Acan, I think over the past couple of years, we've all experienced what it's like to go through a global emergency, and we've all experienced how isolating that can be. So we're hoping that WSA Acan can really be a support group for everyone as we're combating this, and so that we can keep motivated and people can engage with activism in a way that really works for them. And so to that end, we've organised our first couple of events. So on the 6th of October, we've got our first sort of wider WSA Acan group. Everyone's invited, whether you're an educator or a student. And we're going to run through a little bit more about what WSA Acan is and how it's structured. And then we're going to start brainstorming. So we're really hoping that everyone can get involved, and the more people who can come, the more we can be representative of the WSA community. And then the week after that, on the 13th, we're having an informal get-together in Butte Park to chat about eco-anxiety. I think this is something that's really important, and we want to be able to support sort of our community through through this crisis. So yeah, come along. It's really informal. Again, everyone's invited, and there's going to be snacks. I'm going to make some muffins. Please come along. It's going to be really fun. So if you want to get more involved and stay up to date, I put some QR codes up on the screen. I'll pop a link in the chat in a second. But if anyone wants to scan them, those are links to broadcast channels for Acan, StuCan, and our WhatsApp group for WSA Acan. And here's another link. So this will go to our link tree. I'll just pop a link in the chat now. Here we go. But that will take you to our Facebook, our Instagram, our WhatsApp, so you can keep up to date with all of our events as they come. And there will also be links there to all of our upcoming events and our resources as we curate them. Thank you so much for listening. We hope that everyone listening who's part of the WSA community can get involved. Again, the more people who can get involved, the more we can sort of accurately represent what we need, and the more we can campaign for real change, and the more difference we can make. Yeah, I'll hand over back to Adriana. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Bethan, for presenting the launch. Very exciting. And for me personally, I've always wanted to be part of this through the start at Acan, and through working through with StuCan, all these student handbooks on how to voice yourself and use your agency. So this is a very great culmination for me personally. I would also like to thank the panel for your time, for sharing your work, for really contributing to a great conversation, and all the tangents that did emerge. They just made the conversation even better, and be able to encompass how much this will affect us, and that it does affect every part of our education, of our lives. And being a responsible citizen is also very key with changing your mind, like Marianna did mention. And I think the role within your community, as WSA Can's launch will hopefully emulate. I really enjoyed hearing all the talks today, all three of them, and then the panel and this launch. It just great day to be able to organize and be able to share with my cohort. And I would like to also thank the amazing teamwork from the WSA Festival team and the exhibition team, curation, for the opportunity to delve into the subjects covered in the students' work, especially for the Climate Day for myself. I will have to say goodbye, and I will pass to my chair, Gina, to close the festival.
Thanks, Aidana. Hi, everyone. I'm Gina. I have been chair of the festival and show for the past 4 months. I wanted to start with a thank you, because we've had, over the past week since we've launched, we've had over 30,000 people visit our digital exhibition site, which is pretty crazy. But also a thank you to everyone who attended our events over the past week and supported all the brilliant students who helped make this possible. And of course, thank you, as Aidana said, to all the speakers and panelists that have given us their time and their knowledge and agreed to share this educational experience and event with the public, so that we can make this an open source public resource for everyone to learn from. And of course, thank you to the whole WSA Festival and Show team. In particular, I want to call out Sophie, McAulay, Rory, Nathila, Aidana, Julia, Dan, and Cameron, who have stepped up this year and taken on leading roles in the show and festival. Despite our professional appearance on social media and other platforms, which has led to us being kind of treated as the school itself, I am really proud to say that this festival has been entirely organised by really hardworking students, and I'm really proud of what everyone's achieved during this time. Organising the show and festival this year has been an incredibly insightful yet challenging experience. We seized all the opportunities afforded to us by the pandemic and being completely virtual to create an amazing series of events that wouldn't have come about any other way. We delved into interests of all the students at the university thanks to the curation team. But although we use these to organise work in a way that hasn't been done before, usually it's by year groups and units rather than actually by interests. We've used them in the past week to celebrate research, designs, and the passions of all of the students through all these amazing events. The festival served as an opportunity not only to celebrate the work, but to share knowledge and research with the wider community and to serve as a platform for education along so many meaningful topics. Over the past 5 days, we've had over 33 panelists and speakers, I just counted them actually, from the likes of HOK, Corkin, FAF, Involved Magazine, and City Intelligence Lab, and so many more, spanning topics of architecture and politics, urbanism and society, computation and innovation, history and heritage, and climate change, of course. And I've asked each of our day organisers to reflect on their themes and what knowledge has emerged from their days. I'm going to share my screen as well, because I quickly put together... oops. Oh, not fine. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, yeah, I've quickly put together all the posters from all the events that have kind of happened in the past week. I'm now going to pass on to Nathila, who did the architecture and politics thing.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So for the architecture and politics, for the past few months working with WSA students and organising this event, I personally definitely learned so much and gotten an insight not only what I wanted to investigate, but also all these other dates. I've got to look in depth of such different topics. Initially, I had some knowledge on architecture and politics, but I didn't know how to communicate. And I kind of wanted to reflect this through this event because I also know what students thought throughout all these past 3 years, of which I was a WSA student. And I know there was so many difficulties, but people wouldn't really speak up. And so regarding this event, I knew there were some independent groups, but I haven't learned so much about them until the months leading up to this. But that wasn't the end of it. All the talks were so impressive, whether it was by students or professionals. And I was extremely impressed when the evening discussion turned into a full-on debate, which I know all the students kind of needed to hear. What I've also learned is that how much WSA needs to be connected with the system, particularly with the RIBA and the different schools such as the AAA to get an insight on the different methods of teaching, which is very, very relevant from a socio-political manner in a global crisis. And the things like that should be brought up for discussions. I do really hope for the WSA to continue with events. Each of these days are so relevant for discussions and really brings together an insight which school can learn from. So yeah, that's what I have to say for the politics. I'll pass it on to Georgina because I don't think Rory is here.
Do you think I saw him join? Rory, are you here? Oh, he's gone again.
No.
Well, move my screen about. The second day at Urban Community was actually surprisingly interesting. We started the day off with a debate on the future of urbanisation, where we kind of talked about the future of cities and what role artificial intelligence and sustainable design may play in their futures. And then the evening events were kind of inspired by a chat we actually had concerning the exhibition in fifth year, because we were thinking of moving it to London, obviously, so more people could see all the work if we were going to do a physical exhibition. But this sparked off a massive debate about decentralisation. And, we're a Welsh university, why are we having an exhibition in London? And so this was kind of brought to light in the panel on that day, which was called Are We All Just Hypocrites? Because so much talent leaves Cardiff and the WSA after graduating to go straight to London. And I think it was just delving into that as a university, what can we do to be different? Pass on to myself, I guess, because I did the next day. The Computation Innovation event placed a huge emphasis on democratizing computational tools and the importance of AI for the future of architecture. I ran a workshop in the morning, 2 hours, trying to encourage young students to get involved with computational tools and placing emphasis on the fact that they're not as intimidating as you think, and it's all about the mindset that you approach the problems with. And once you learn that mindset, you can apply it to the rest of your designs in general. Then we had Theodore Galamas, like a world-renowned researcher, and I can't believe he said yes to coming to speak to us, which is wonderful. He was working on an AI-driven urban design tool called Infrared currently, and he came to talk to us about design intelligence, specifically some ML models, one particularly called DALI, which is extremely interesting, and you all should Google. But I think it was an incredibly interesting talk, followed also by Neil Leach in the evening. He was a NASA research fellow looking at 3D printing on the moon and Mars. Again, incredible people, calling in from all over the world, that I'm very happy were able to come and speak with us. And then we had a panel on the future of architecture, AI and the architect. And I think what we concluded is that, technology, while out of reach for many, should be democratized. And that is the only way for it to become fully useful and valuable within the architectural field. Because if we as architects don't understand our own tools, then how are we going to use them to transform society in the way that we want and approach problems and topics that have been covered by the rest of the day, such as climate change and politics? I'll pass on to McAulay now.
Can everyone hear me? Awesome. So my day was yesterday, and it was quite a tricky day to choose exactly which way to attack history and heritage as a topic, and I ended up actually having quite a bit of overlap with other people in the groups, as it's quite easy to delve into how we use technology or how we attack approach sustainability within this, but history and heritage is always something I've always been interested in, and I've worked in practice for a few years before joining the WSA, and most of my projects are about conservation and how we approach refurbishing and reworking older buildings into more modern and useful context. So it's very interesting to meet up with old colleagues and meet a lot of new people when organising the day, which was very interesting. But the day itself focused on how we use these older buildings and how we understand them, and how technology and how they can be used for better sustainable goals in the future.
I mean, the last is climate change, but I think Aidana, you've already wrapped that up. Something else you wanted to add?
I would just like to do a quick recap, maybe. So the day started off with Cardiff alumni, Culkin Studio, with Josh, one of the co-founders, explaining how they tried to construct an aim to resource everything locally, and their projects and sustainability within the firm. Then followed by a talk by the Duncan Baker Brown, where he gave a very rich and amazing overview of all the work from the 25 years that he's been focusing on closed loop and circular systems, and covering many subjects, and where he is currently working towards with the School of Reconstruction, with his firm itself, and through other ventures outside of this island in the UK with deconstruction and amazing companies like Rotor, and all really exciting. Again, on the story, recapped and will be recorded. Later on, second half of the day, we had the talk by Scott McAuley, talking about agency and what can be done and what he has done as an example of where we need to be going. And then we had the awards evenings. Again, thank you very much to the 3 students for presenting, and a panel to finish off the day, which we had our fellow WSA lecturer and PhD candidate join us for a very good discussion chaired by Bethan in 3rd year, and who has now launched the WSA Can branch of Acan. For me personally, I would say it was a great opportunity, and I'm really glad that Gina reached out the invite to me. I'm really humbled to be able to share and kind of channel all the great tools and opportunities that I've been given through following Scott's Instagram and through being involved with Acan. I think I really do owe these this voice that I found in a sense to be able to share this with the rest of the cohort to them. And thank you very much again to the amazing team, and the fact that it was all student led and made, and all the hours spent editing every single thing and being able to make such a multifaceted, especially marketing strategy, which has impressed not only myself, but the many people we've asked to come and speak with us. And I'm really humbled and thankful and grateful. Thank you very much again. I'll pass back to my chair to...
Thanks, Aidana. It's been exciting, but I think difficult few months. But I think for all of us, the amount of work we put in to reflect the passions and interests of students, we put in the hopes that the WSA and other schools would listen, that these are kind of, this is what architects or up-and-coming architects are currently passionate about, especially to do with things like technology and the climate crisis. Yes, that's you, Aidana. Technology, the climate crisis, architecture and politics. They're all areas where so much change needs to occur right now. And change begins in education and the system itself. So I know that all of us were hoping that the festival itself this year would kind of set the scene, hopefully even influence some of the briefs and modules for the upcoming year. It's what architecture students want to see happening in their own education. So I do hope that is taken forward and taken seriously, because I think this festival has been. I'm so happy again to contribute to the architectural community as a whole with all of these resources beyond our school, because that was our aim this year. We're online, we can reach out to anyone and everyone can see our work. Like I said before, it's about democratizing education and knowledge. Without further ado, yes, I'm getting to that. I wanted to conclude today with the launch of our 3D exhibition. I have just published it on the site. So it is now live. If you go to the virtual tour section of the website, you will see it. And we can just kind of drag around. There's a note here from the team. Quick kind of summary of all our themes on the wall, as well as, there was a plan on the floor of Butte Building. It's a bit sensitive, but yes, so you can see there's climate change here, architecture and politics, urbanism and community, history and heritage, computation and innovation. And the lines will kind of direct you where you need to go. And it's an incredible, we've also got my unit's own models here on the ceiling, which are based on solar forms, and students' physical models kind of scattered about. There's a great thing here too, which I haven't seen anyone else do university-wise, which is you can step into someone's design and model, which I think is really incredible and is a completely immersive experience. I urge all of you to have a look around, explore. This is finally live. I gave a quick demo of it last Friday as it was still being finished. But yeah, I'm really happy. Oh, sorry. And if you click on anyone's name, it will open that page so you can look at their work in more detail, because these renders obviously are they're nice, but it's difficult to see some of the work in as much detail as you might like. I hope everyone manages to have a look this and feel like they're once again in Butte Building, which has been recently renovated and most of us have not seen. So yeah, I know it's pretty amazing, right? Yeah, I'm really proud of what everyone has achieved over the length of the show and the festival. You know, website, got a yearbook, awards for the first time this year, which is pretty crazy. Done everything really, and I'm really proud of what everyone has achieved. And I think I'll wrap this up on that note. So thank you, everyone. Oh, paste the link. Oh, it's on the website. Literally, virtual tour at the top. But I guess I also would like that. I'll crop this out of the final recording. But yeah, so there it is. So I hope everyone has a chance to look around, properly look through the website, and we will be uploading videos and recordings of all of our events next week. So you'll be able to watch them back with as much time as you want and share them. And I know that a lot of people will be able to view them that way, so it's really important to do it. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy everything that we've created together. Thank you.